At the start of day 20, I decided to make good on the promise I made to the grieving father. I combed the northeastern shoreline of Little Marrow for his son's shipwreck, doing some fishing along the way. Shortly after noon, I had retrieved the belt buckle. With plenty of daylight left, I hurried back to Little Marrow to return the belt buckle to the father. For my help, he gave me a research part. I then spent the remainder of day 20 fishing for mackerel and upgrading my ship's lights, engines, and rods with the materials I had collected. With my sights set southeast towards Gale Cliffs, day 21 began. I started reading The Engineer's Companion and tested my trawl net along the 8-hour voyage, snagging one fish with it. By 1 o'clock, I arrived to Gale Cliffs. I introduced myself to a traveling merchant who had set up a market and dockyards on the northern coast. Like the mayor, the merchant also mentioned that the photographer had set up camp somewhere between the Marrows and Gale Cliffs, and I made a note to pay her a visit. I also noticed that the merchant sold crab pots, but for the moment, I had little interest in crustaceans. I then fetched a message in a bottle from the middle of the bay and learned that the waterspouts damaged my ship. Of course they do. A lucky pull while dredging earned me a research part, which I went to go spend on my next engine upgrade before learning that I had immediately sent it spiraling overboard after crashing into a rock. I spotted a rare fish spawn and decided now was as good of a time as ever to fish. I caught a black sea bass in my net before fishing for some blackmouth salmon. Day 21 concluded with a conversation between myself and a hermit who lived in an abandoned town adjacent to the cliff's entrance. Observing the town's state and its proximity to the looming cliffs, I asked the hermit why he chose to live here and not in Ingfell, the nearby town. To my inquiries, the hermit confessed that he had been reconsidering his residence lately. I offered to help him move, but he explained that it was not so simple. See, in his youth, the hermit had disagreed with his brother over how to split their family inheritance, creating a rift between the siblings that grew when the hermit stole away with the family crest here to the ruined town. But the problem got worse. During the town's collapse, the family crest became one of many possessions dragged back to the burrows of the monster that lived within the cliffs. If the hermit and his brother were to make amends, I would need to brave the cliffs and the monster within. So of course, I agreed to help. Rain announced day 22, and an unwelcomed visit made it one to remember. I crossed the bay early in the morning and sold yesterday's catch to the merchant. I then paid a visit to Ingfell, where I introduced myself to a local who requested I bring her a rotting conger eel, aged, as she called it. She continued to tell me that this type of eel hides within the holes and burrows of cliffs, only leaving at night to feed. For now, this didn't seem like a problem, so I agreed to indulge her questionable appetite. I spent the next few hours dredging and fishing, catching my first tiger mackerel and oceanic perch, the second of these two introducing with it a new minigame, before venturing into the cliffs from its western entrance. Inside, some dredge in the passage beneath a jutted-out rock caught my attention, but a rock slide prevented me from punching the one-way ticket my curiosity had nearly handed me.
Excuse me? What? What?
After one lap around Ingfell, I shook the serpent from my tail and docked. I met the hermit's brother, who did indeed still hold a grudge, before turning in for the night. Though I was happy to see the day end, my business in Gale Cliffs had become infinitely more complicated. I devoted the next 2 days to the typical busy work. I made the short trip from Ingfell to the floating dock early in the morning of day 23 to complete my last upgrade and unlock the new haul before fishing for salmon, mackerel, and perch to make enough money to buy a research part. On day 24, I fished some more, discovered a line of rocks blocking the cliff's thoroughfare, dredged up a silver trinket, and spent a research part on the next engine upgrade. With the close encounter with the sea serpent still on my mind, I woke up on day 25 and chose violence, a decision I soon regretted.
I think we try to go through Mr. Leviathan's secret abode. Oh my god, what? Oh, big mistake going through here.
After a short chase, the sea snake lost interest, allowing me to meander back into the cliffs. Though I suffered some damage in the process, I pulled in a bag of doubloons from a shipwreck in the first chamber of the cliffs. But without a trader nearby, all I could do was store my loot and dream about the payout that awaited me in Little Marrow. Day 26 was a bit of a write-off. I left the floating dock early in the morning and sailed along the northern side of Gale Cliffs. Soon, I came across an opening into the cliffs, but was more interested in the rare fish spawn that sat directly in its mouth. Without a hydraulic rod equipped, however, I wasn't fishing here anytime soon, so I sailed back to the floating docks and equipped one in place of my trawl net. By this time, it was past noon and my fresh start hadn't paid off, so I put head to pillow and told myself tomorrow would be different. On day 27, I caught some blackmouth salmon and reeled in some sturgeon in yesterday's spot. I was pleased to sell my catch for roughly a $200 profit, which landed me enough coin to purchase the final research part needed for the twin jet drive engine. I did have to check my excitement for the minute though, since I was still $400 shy of the $500 needed for the engines. I can't remember if it was the last few days I had spent sailing around Gale Cliffs without hiccup or my anticipation for the new engines that lowered my guard on day 28, but the lesson of the day I swore never to forget. As was becoming my routine, I woke up before dawn and sailed the northern shores of Gale Cliffs. By first light, I sat before the cliff's middle passage, partly sheltered from the rain by its arching rocks. For the moment, I decided against exploring any further, turning away to do some dredging and missing the trembles signaling an awakened friend. Oh! With my engines disabled by the sea snake's attack, I made the tiring row back to the floating dock, keeping a lookout for the second strike I would be powerless to avoid.
We might end up as some dredge soon.
By luck of the sea, I made it back to the dock safely before dusk, and even had enough money saved to repair my engines before turning in for the night. On day 29, I decided to be proactive, fishing to earn some money for a rainy day fund in case of any more run-ins with the sea snake. I also organized my storage. Day 30 began with me touching and getting rejected by a rock. I then fished for some sturgeon before narrowly avoiding another run-in with the sea snake.
Yeah, like where did you come from?
I have to admit, for his size, he was surprisingly nimble.
You can't thread this gap, I bet.
Back at the floating dock, I sold the sturgeon I had caught and put the materials collected towards the hull upgrade before turning in early for the day. On day 31, I spotted my first orcas and caught around $100 worth of fish, landing me $35.16 shy of the new engine's upgrade. With the engines within reach, I began making plans on day 32 to retrieve the family crest from within the cliffs.
So the family crest is in the cliffs. That's fantastic. Let's get this upgrade and then we'll think about getting the family crest. Jeez, everything seems to be at the bottom of the sea.
I caught as much salmon as my cargo would hold and filled the remaining gaps with perch. By 7 at night, it had all the makings of a successful day. I sold my fish to the merchant and bought the new engines with some change to spare. Drunk on excitement, my failure to plan ahead smacked me sober when it became clear that I'd need a new hull before installing the engines. Though in my heart I now knew the engines were many days away, I held out hope that there was some combination of rotations and squares that I had missed. There wasn't, so I checked what materials I was missing for the hull upgrade and went to bed. Day 33 came and went. I left the floating docks early and was coasting into the cliffs by 8 a.m. I avoided a run-in with the sea snake before dredging up 2 bundles of cloth needed for the hull upgrade and a research part. Of course, it wouldn't be a typical day of mine without crashing into a rock, damage I repaired at the floating docks before going to sleep. I started day 34 by putting the cloth from yesterday towards the hull upgrade before fishing for salmon, sturgeon, and mackerel. I also won the dredge minigame and got $255 for my efforts. I then spotted a rare fish spawn, so I installed my shallows rod and pulled in my first direct fish. It was also time to start a new book, The Relaxed Mind. On day 35, I charted a course for a sailfish spawn between Gale Cliffs and the Marrows. Along the way, I spotted a breaching blue whale, which was probably the most magical moment I had this far. I followed my new friend for a little before reeling in a sallow sailfish that sold for $368. Money I used to buy the refined metal needed for my hull upgrade. Day 36 arrived and I decided to pay the photographer a visit. I caught my new favorite fish during the westward voyage to her island. Once there, the photographer explained how she had landed herself in a predicament. On her way from Stellar Basin, she mistakenly crashed into coral when she heard a disturbance in the water behind her, sending a set of lenses overboard, a feeling I was all too familiar with. Because she needed these lenses for her work, she asked if I'd recover them and promised a camera as a reward. Remembering the moment with my great blue buddy earlier, I agreed to help. I rounded out the day by catching another wreckfish and selling the pair for $166. On day 37, I rose with the sun and dredged for some cloth. I also decided to finally brave the inner cliffs without my new engines. Inside, I found a scenic chamber and a dredging spot, and I knew the crest was near. Sure enough, it was, and I reeled it in quick before making my exit. On my way back to the floating docks, I found a rock with crab-like engravings that seemed to have a spot for an item. For now, I had nothing that would fit, so I made a note of it and left. I then added the last of the cloth to the hull upgrade. It was now only missing 2 pieces of wood. On day 38, I reconciled 2 brothers. First, I returned the family crest to the hermit, who asked me to return it to his brother in Ingfell with the message that he'd like to come home. In Ingfell, the whaler agreed to put his brother up in his old workshop, but told me he needed some time to get the space in order. In the meantime, he asked if I'd detonate the rubble blocking the pathways through the cliffs. A strange request, I thought, for a retired whaler. Still, doing so would make navigating the cliffs much easier for myself, so I happily obliged to help. I also tried to sneak into the cliffs to get the materials I needed for the hull upgrade, but the sea snake wasn't taking any visitors. This wasn't really a problem since there was much safer places to go looking. Besides, it was nice to see a family feud end.